Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News, an Indian perspective on All India Radio. I am Reshma Tiwari, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi holds a high-level meeting to discuss the COVID-19 situation in the country, calls for localized containment strategies and scaling up vaccination process to contain the pandemic. Government augments capacity of indigenous production of Covaxin under Atmanirbhar Bharat 3.0 mission. U.S. envoy arrives in Tel Aviv for talks with Israeli and Palestinian officials. Singapore returns to the lockdown-like conditions as coronavirus cases rise in the country. Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli forms minority government after opposition parties fail to form a coalition. China's first Mars rover Zhu Rong successfully lands on Mars, and in tennis, defending champion Novak Djokovic beats Stefanos Tsitsipas to enter the Italian Open semi-finals. As the number of COVID cases are on the rise, we appeal to our listeners not to lower the guard, follow all the precautions, and all those who have taken the first dose of COVID-19 vaccine to get vaccinated with the second dose at the scheduled time. Stay safe and protected by following these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. And now the news in detail. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has stressed the need for ramping up the speed of vaccination, testing and the augmentation of healthcare resources to effectively deal with the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. He has also emphasized on the implementation of localized containment strategies and the proper distribution of oxygen supply in the rural areas. The Prime Minister on Saturday chaired a high-level meeting to discuss the COVID and vaccination-related situation in the country. During the meeting, officials gave detailed presentations on the state and district level situation, testing capacities, availability of oxygen, healthcare infrastructure and vaccination roadmap. Mr. Modi said that localized containment strategies are the need of the hour, especially in those states wherein test positivity rate is high. The Prime Minister has instructed to scale up the testing with use of RT-PCR and rapid antigen tests in such areas. He said the states should be encouraged to report their COVID cases in a transparent manner. The Prime Minister asked for augmentation of healthcare resources in rural areas by adopting door-to-door testing and surveillance strategies. He also spoke about empowering ASHA and Anganwadi workers with all necessary tools. Mr. Modi also stressed on providing the guidelines in easy language for home isolation and treatment in rural areas. He added that necessary training must be provided to health workers in the operation of medical equipment and asked that smooth power supply be ensured for operation of such medical devices. Taking serious note of some of the reports about ventilators lying unutilized in storage in some states, Mr. Modi directed that an immediate audit of installation and operation of ventilators provided by the central government should be carried out. Mr. Modi directed officials to work closely with states to ramp up the speed of vaccination. Meanwhile, the Union Health Ministry has said that the country is witnessing a continuous decline in the number of active cases of COVID-19 and an increase in recovery rate from the last 12 days. Addressing the media in New Delhi, Joint Secretary in the Health Ministry Love Agarwal said that the active cases have now come down to 15.1% from 17.1% since the 3rd of this month. The recovery rate also improved further from 81.7% to 83.8%. On the status of vaccination, Mr. Agarwal said that India's cumulative vaccination coverage exceeds 18.04 crore. India's Science and Technology Ministry has said that the Atmanirbhar Bharat 3.0 mission COVID Suraksha was announced to accelerate the development and production of indigenous COVID vaccines. To augment the capacity of indigenous production of Covaxin under the mission, the Department of Biotechnology had provided financial support to vaccine manufacturing facilities for enhanced production capacities, which is expected to reach more than 10 crore doses per month by September this year. Meanwhile, the first batch of drug 2-deoxy-D-glucose is expected to be launched next week for the COVID patients. The drug has been developed by the Defense Research and Development Organization DRDO, which recently got the approval for emergency use by the Drugs Controller General of India DCGI. The drug 2-deoxy-D-glucose comes in powder form in sachet, which needs to be taken orally by dissolving it in water. It accumulates in the virus-infected cells and prevents virus growth by stopping viral synthesis and energy production. Its selective accumulation in virally infected cells makes this drug unique. A Kuwaiti ship arrived at Nhava Sheva, Mumbai on Saturday carrying 3 semi-trailers of liquid medical oxygen and 1,000 oxygen cylinders on board. India has expressed gratitude to the Amir of Kuwait and the government of Kuwait for this. The External Affairs Ministry also appreciated the support of Australia as a consignment of 25,000 ventilator valves arrived on Saturday. Ministry spokesman Arindam Bagchi said, an oxygen concentrator received from Switzerland is being put to good use in GB Pant Hospital in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. This is one of the 600 oxygen concentrators that arrived from Switzerland on 7th May. The High Commission of India in the United Kingdom said that 260 more oxygen concentrators have been airlifted to New Delhi. Taking to Twitter, the High Commission thanked donors for their generous contribution, along with Qatar Airways, Air Vistara and DB Schenker for free logistics. Now let's take a look at the coronavirus updates from around the world. The head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, said that wealthier nations should postpone plans to give COVID-19 vaccines to children and teenagers and instead donate supplies to low-income countries. Speaking at a virtual conference in Geneva on Friday, Dr. Tedros urged countries to supply more vaccines to the Global Fair Access Scheme, COVAX. The international distribution of COVID vaccines remains vastly uneven. Last week, U.S. President Joe Biden laid out plans to begin coronavirus vaccine shots for 12 to 15-year-olds as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Canada has authorized the use of the Pfizer vaccine against coronavirus for the children between the age of 12 and 15 years. Meanwhile, the U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai virtually met World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus to discuss increasing vaccine production and the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights TRIPS waiver on COVID-19 vaccines for the pandemic. According to a statement from her office on Friday, Tai explained the U.S. administration's support for the waiver of intellectual property protections for COVID-19 vaccines and explained that this fits the United States' comprehensive effort to expand vaccine manufacturing and distribution around the world. Earlier, the U.S. Trade Representative also met Union Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal to discuss the same issue. She also explained her support for the TRIPS waiver and text-based negotiations at the World Trade Organization WTO. Singapore is returning to the lockdown-like conditions, banning dining in and limiting gatherings to 2 people. The country's health ministry in a statement said for 4 weeks from 16th May to the 13th of June, sizes of gatherings as well as household visitors will be cut to a maximum of 2 people from 5 people now. Working from home will be the default and food places can only do takeaways and deliveries. A long gestating air travel bubble with Hong Kong set to start on 26th of this month is now unlikely to go ahead on schedule. Singapore was also scheduled to host the Shangri-La Dialogue early next month and the Davos-based World Economic Forum in August. Bangladesh reported 22 deaths and 261 new cases of coronavirus in the country on Saturday. According to the latest figures released by the Directorate General of Health Services DGHS, the death toll in the country has gone up to 12,124, while the number of people infected by the virus is now over 7.79 lakh since the first case was reported in March last year. However, the number of active cases in the country is close to 46,000 as of now. Taiwan raised its coronavirus alert level on Saturday in the capital Taipei and the city around it. Taiwan has brought curbs for a period of 2 weeks that will shut many venues and restrict gatherings in the wake of 180 new domestic infections. This is All India Radio giving you the world news.
3 steps to stay protected and stay safe from COVID-19. Wear face mask, 2 gaz ki duri to maintain social distancing, maintain hand and face hygiene.
Welcome back. At least 10 more Palestinians were killed today by Israeli security forces across the occupied West Bank as protests erupted against Israel's aerial bombardment in Gaza and the possible eviction of Palestinians from East Jerusalem. Gaza's health ministry says at least 122 Palestinians, including 31 children, have been killed and more than 900 wounded in the enclave since the latest round of violence began. Meanwhile, a U.S. envoy has arrived in Tel Aviv for de-escalation talks as unrest between Israel and the Palestinians continues. Hadi Amr will take part in talks with Israeli, Palestinian and UN officials and reinforce what U.S. diplomats said was the need for a sustainable calm. Israeli airstrikes on targets in the Gaza Strip killed 10 people today, while Palestinians fired rockets into Israel. This week's violence in Gaza and Israel is the worst since 2014. At least 150 people have been killed in Gaza and the West Bank and 8 in Israel since the fighting began. Mr. Amir's arrival comes ahead of a UN Security Council meeting tomorrow. The U.S. Embassy in Israel said the aim of his trip was to reinforce the need to work toward a sustainable calm. An estimated 10,000 Palestinians have left their homes in Gaza since Monday because of the conflict, according to the UN. Israeli officials reported that about 200 rockets launches from Gaza overnight, with homes hit in the cities Ashdod, Beersheba and Sderot. Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli has formed a minority government after opposition parties failed to form a coalition, days after he lost a vote of confidence in Parliament. Mr. Oli took the oath of office and secrecy in a ceremony at Sheetal Nivas Friday afternoon as parliamentary leader of Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninist CPN-UML, the biggest political party in terms of number of seats in the Nepal Parliament. President Bidya Devi Bhandari appointed Mr. Oli as Prime Minister on Thursday evening, as he is the leader of the largest party in Parliament. Mr. Oli has now become Prime Minister for the 3rd time. He is the 43rd Prime Minister of Nepal. Along with Mr. Oli, cabinet members under his administration also took an oath of secrecy. Mr. Oli has not inducted any new face in his new cabinet. All those who were part of his cabinet prior to the confidence motion have been given continuity in the cabinet. In today's Hotspot section, we are bringing you a discussion on the latest political developments in the country.
We have seen that KP Sharma Oli has been sworn in as Nepal's Prime Minister on Friday, 4 days after he lost a crucial vote of confidence in Parliament. The President of Nepal administered the oath of office and secrecy to him, and he is the Prime Minister today, even though he will be heading a minority government as he does not enjoy a majority in Parliament after losing the vote of confidence on Monday. Ambassador Sajjanwar, we see this political instability in Nepal. We had the House which was dissolved in December. Then Monday we saw KP Sharma Oli losing this vote of confidence. Now he's sworn in again. So for our listeners, if you could explain as to what is happening in Nepal and why it is currently undergoing this state of political instability.
One comment at the beginning I'd like to make is that political instability has been in Nepal for the last more than a decade, ever since democracy came to Nepal. For instance, if you were to see over the last 10 years, Nepal has had a change of 8 prime ministers. But if we come to the current crisis, I think it really started from 2017 in November when the elections were held. KP Sharma Oli, as the leader of the biggest party, which is the Communist Party of Nepal, United Marxist-Leninist, he'd got more than 120 seats in the 275-member parliament. So he was sworn in February as the Prime Minister. And then the two communist parties, that is CPN UML, United Marxist Leninist, headed by KP Sharma Oli, and the Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist Center, that is headed by Prachanda, so who's Prachanda Kamal Dahal. So he has about 50 members of that. So both of them, these two parties came together. They joined in May. So it became the Communist Party of Nepal, and they had a very comfortable majority, which means about 120 plus 50, 170 seats in 275. But then there have been problems, there have been recriminations, there has been criticism of KP Sharma Oli, particularly by Prachanda and also other leaders of the Communist Party, that is Madhav Kumar Nepal and some of the others. Now here, as far as the CPN is concerned, the Joint Communist Party, there were two co-chairs, both KP Sharma Oli and Prachanda himself. The problems really started coming to the fore last year when in 2020, when the COVID pandemic struck Nepal. And the criticism of KP Sharma Oli became much louder because both the opponents, as far as the opposition political parties like the Nepali Congress, headed by Sher Bahadur Deba, which has about 61 members in the parliament. Also, the Samajwadi Party, the Jatiya Samajwadi Party, which has about 16 members, they were, of course, criticizing the government. But within the Communist Party, as I mentioned, Prachanda and the other leaders, they also started criticizing KP Sharma Oli, saying that he has not been able to control corruption, he's not been able to control the spread of the pandemic, and so he should be removed. So when there was a no confidence vote to be passed against KP Sharma Oli, then he dissolved the parliament on the 20th of December last year. And the president of the country cooperated with him. The election was to be held in April. But then this issue was taken up to the Supreme Court there were 8 petitions which went to the Supreme Court because they said that there is no provision of this nature in the Nepalese parliament which had been adopted in 2015 and that it should be struck down. KP Sharma Oli, of course, said that he was not being allowed to function and that is why he had decided to go to the court of the people. So the Supreme Court struck down this dissolution of the parliament in February and said that the parliament should be reinstated. And then is what followed, what you have mentioned, Simran, that on Monday there was the meeting of the parliament in which he was voted out because he does not have the majority. The president gave 4 days up to 9 p.m. on Thursday to the opposition to bring together a coalition so that could govern. They were hopeful that if Madhav Kumar Nepal and his followers were to leave KP Sharma Oli, then Sher Bahadur Deba, the leader of the Nepali Congress, would be able to form a government. But at the last minute, KP Sharma Oli extended some sort of olive branch and some benefits, inducements to Madhav Nepal, and he made a U-turn. As a result of that, on Friday, KP Sharma Oli has again been sworn in for the 3rd time as the Prime Minister. He is an interim Prime Minister. He is leading a minority government. He has to seek a vote of confidence from the Parliament within 30 days, and it's a moot point whether he'll be able to do so.
Ambassador Sajjana, there's also been this talk that the corona crisis which has hit the world and it has hit Nepal also. And a lot of people have said that the Oli government has also not been able to handle the crisis. And that has also added to his popularity going down and that has fueled this crisis. Would you agree that the COVID pandemic and Nepal's increasing inability to manage it is also feeding into this political instability?
This is correct because, when the COVID pandemic hit last year, at that time in the middle of the year, KP Sharma Oli had said that this is a virus that is coming from India, which is much more lethal. He was, of course, trying to promote hyper-nationalistic emotions amongst the people. But at that time, if the government was not really able to handle the crisis effectively, and at that time, the infected cases were about 100 a day. Today, what we see is that they are in the range of about 10,000 a day. So for a country which has such a small population, and for it to have 10,000 cases a day, it has very limited number of ICU beds, hospitals. there is a shortage of oxygen in the country. So it has been found completely wanting. But this is the second wave of the pandemic that is hitting Nepal just now. The matter has become much more serious because the numbers are huge and becoming totally unmanageable as far as the government is concerned.
Master Sajana, we've also seen that of late we've seen China becoming very active in the affairs of Nepal. We've seen that the Chinese ambassador in Kathmandu has been quite active behind the scenes, and we've also seen relationship between Nepal and China, which seems to be growing to the extent where one feels that there is an interference in Nepal's internal affairs by China. Do you feel that China is also playing its own political endgames here, where it wants a government in Kathmandu which is more pro-China and say less pro-India?
Well, China is expanding and increasing its footprint in Nepal. And there are a variety of reasons. One, of course, you mentioned is that it wants to take Nepal out of the ambit of very close relations with India and to bring it under its own influence or under its own dominance, so to say. Second is, of course, there are Tibetan people in Nepal, and it does not want that there should be any problems or difficulty. Although Tibet has been quite peaceful of late, it doesn't want that there should be any problems as far as in the Tibetan Autonomous Region and in Nepal coming together to protest against Chinese rule. Then, of course, is the BRI, and China wants to expand its infrastructure coverage in Nepal. So there are a variety of reasons, and Nepal also wants to have good relations with China so that it feels that it can have better terms from India, and also it feels that China is able to complete the infrastructure projects much faster, much quicker than India has normally been able to do. In fact, it was China which had brought the two communist parties together. So while they would be willing to go to a certain extent with China, but they will not do the bidding. Although again, because the ruling party now is Communist Party, ideologically also they are quite similar in their outlook of global politics and social issues. But still they are not, the Nepalese leaders would not be willing to hand over all their sovereign decision-making to China.
Master Sajana, we've also seen that India and Nepal have shared historically very close ties. And these ties are the people-to-people ties, the cultural ties, the social ties, and these ties extend decades and years into history. One also gets the sense that one sees political instability in Nepal. It also affects India in the sense that this is a close neighbor and India watches very closely the developments in Nepal. How do you think for a country like India, the developments in Nepal today affect it, and how closely would India be watching it? And what would you say is the future of, say, Nepal and its instability, and how long are we going to see this phase of instability? And as you had mentioned, Nepal has been in this phase of political instability, it seems almost forever now, if you look at it.
I think that this phase of instability is likely to continue because if KP Sharma Oli has to seek a vote of confidence within 30 days, it appears very unlikely that he will be able to get a vote of confidence from the parliament. As I mentioned, he has just about 121 members in the parliament. He needs at least 15 more, 136, if he has to get a majority in the 271 member. And it is quite unlikely because from the other faction of the Communist Party, I don't think he will get any support. So I think going forward, there will have to be elections sooner rather than later. And that will have its own strand of instability. Now, as far as India is concerned, you are very right when you said that both the countries share unique ties of friendship and cooperation. They are characterized by open borders. They are characterized by very deep-rooted people-to-people ties and contacts of kinship, of culture, of civilization. And I think that is the biggest strength as far as our cooperation is concerned. Of course, in economic terms, in defense terms, in connectivity terms, in development partnership terms, there is a huge area where we are cooperating, and India is giving much greater attention and much greater emphasis to our relationship with Nepal. But I think the biggest strength is our people-to-people contact. So you would see that last year, although Prime Minister Oli, he mentioned about, as far as the border issues are concerned, he declared that areas like Kalapani and Lipu Lake and Limpadhuria, that they are property, they are territory of Nepal and not of India. Of course, India put it down, came out with a very sharp reaction to say that this is unwarranted cartographic aggression, and this is Nepal should refrain from it. And these artificial enlargement of territorial claims will not be acceptable to India. But Nepal still went ahead with it because it wanted to stoke this hyper-nationalism, so that he could get the support of the people when his own position was under threat and in danger. After that also, whatever provocations that KP Sharma Oli came up with, India responded to it in very measured way, because India focuses on its people-to-people ties. And all our developmental projects are basically to help the ordinary people on the ground. So I think what our interest is, we are looking for a stable government, but we do not wish to interfere in the internal affairs as far as Nepal is concerned.
Very briefly, Ambassador Sarjanhar, would you say that this instability in Nepal is primarily because of the internal rivalries and the internal infighting that we see, for example, between Oli and Prachanda? It's more an internal manifestation rather than an external one.
Absolutely. I think this is the present problem that we see, instability that we see. I will put it purely to hunger for power by KP Sharma Oli. By hook or by crook, he wishes to stay in office. He wants to stay in power. And that is why you would see even in 2015, when he had been advised to delay the adoption of the constitution so that the rights of the Madhesis could also be incorporated, he did not pay any heed, he did not pay any attention, because he was desperate to come to power. And so he had a one-year tenure as Prime Minister in 2015-16, then from 2018 to 21, and now again he really wants to stick to power by any means.
And in the coming days, we will follow the developments in Nepal. With these thoughts, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
The lander carrying China's first Mars rover, Zhurong, successfully landed on Mars on Saturday. Quoting China National Space Administration, state media said Tianwen-1, consisting of an orbiter, a lander and a rover, was launched from the Wenchang spacecraft launch site on the coast of southern China's island province of Hainan on 23rd July in 2020 and entered the Mars orbit in February this year. Moving on to sports, in the Italian Open tennis, defending champion Novak Djokovic has defeated Stefanos Tsitsipas to enter the semi-finals of the Italian Open 2021. Earlier in the tournament, Rafael Nadal took his revenge by defeating Alexander Zverev 6-3, 6-4 last evening, exactly 1 week after losing to German in the Madrid Open. A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi holds a high-level meeting to discuss the COVID-19 situation in the country, calls for localized containment strategies and scaling up vaccination process to contain the pandemic. Government augments capacity of indigenous production of Covaxin under Atmanirbhar Bharat 3.0 mission. US envoy arrives in Tel Aviv for talks with Israeli and Palestinian officials. Singapore returns to the lockdown-like conditions as coronavirus cases rise in the country. Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli forms minority government after opposition parties failed to form a coalition. China's first Mars rover Zhurong successfully lands on Mars. And in tennis, defending champion Novak Djokovic beats Stefanos Tsitsipas to enter the Italian Open semi-finals. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Costa Rica. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.